Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is July 7th. On this day in 2005, as Londoners began their morning commute, 4 young men were making their way into the city with a deadly plan. Just before 9 a.m., a series of coordinated suicide bombings shook London's transport network to its core. By the end of that morning, 52 innocent people were dead, more than 700 were injured, and an entire nation was left reeling. Today, we're revisiting the tragic events of the 7/7 London bombings, a day that changed the UK forever. Let's get started. July 7, 2005 was just another Thursday in a bustling global city. Trains and buses were packed, and the mood across London was, for once, a bit celebratory. Just the day before, the city had been awarded the 2012 Summer Olympics, and it was a victory that brought joy and pride to millions of people. But beneath that sense of optimism, 4 young men boarded a train from Luton to King's Cross Station, each carrying a backpack loaded with explosives. They didn't stand out, they looked like any other commuter. By 8:50 a.m., after arriving at King's Cross, the group split up and made their way to different parts of the London Underground. Within minutes, 3 bombs exploded in 3 separate locations. The first, on a Circle Line train near Aldgate, killed 7 people. The second, also on the Circle Line, detonated at Edgware Road, killing 6 more. And the third, the deadliest, tore through a Piccadilly line train between King's Cross and Russell Square, killing 26. Deep underground, in dimly lit tunnels, passengers were trapped in smoke-filled carriages, some gravely injured and others trying desperately to help those around them. And then, almost an hour later, came a 4th explosion, this time above ground. At 9:47 a.m., a bomb went off on the top deck of a double-decker bus at Tavistock Square. 13 people were killed in the blast, including the bomber. Witnesses described seeing the roof of the bus lift off into the air. When the dust settled, it was like something out of a war zone. By mid-morning, it was clear this was a coordinated terror attack. But in the moments after the blasts, confusion was everywhere. Early reports mentioned power surges, but as emergency services reached the scenes and the full horror became visible, mangled carriages, bodies, pools of blood, there was no doubt about what had happened. In the Piccadilly line tunnel, survivors were trapped underground in suffocating heat and thick smoke, stumbling in the dark and using their phones to guide each other. Some crawled over shattered glass and debris to try to reach safety. Others stayed behind to help the injured. They were strangers pulling together in the face of unimaginable trauma. Above ground at Tavistock Square, people described hearing a loud bang, then silence, before screams rang out. The bus had been ripped open and debris covered the street. The city ground to a halt. The entire London Underground shut down for the first time in its 142-year history. Bus services were suspended and roads were blocked. And with cell phone networks overwhelmed, people were having a hard time reaching their loved ones. But even in the chaos, acts of compassion stood out. Businesses opened their doors to shelter the stranded. Off-duty medics ran toward the scenes. And Londoners, stunned and heartbroken, leaned on one another. By the afternoon, the entire world was watching. It didn't take long for investigators to realize that the 4 attackers had all died in the blasts. This wasn't just a terror attack, it was a suicide mission. Surveillance footage from King's Cross Station showed the 4 men before they split up. Investigators were able to quickly identify them. Mohammed Sadiq Khan, 30, a teaching assistant and father from Dewsbury. He was believed to be the ringleader. Shahzad Tanweer, 22, a sports-loving university graduate from Leeds. Jermaine Lindsay, 19, originally from Jamaica, who who had converted to Islam as a teen, and Hasib Hussein, just 18 years old, the youngest, who detonated the bus bomb. All four were British citizens, born and or raised in the UK. They didn't come from war zones or terror cells abroad. They were, in many ways, products of the same society that they chose to attack. And that revelation was devastating. This was homegrown terrorism. They weren't outsiders. They were from here, from British cities, schools, and communities. And that fact changed the country's understanding of extremism forever. As the investigation unfolded, more disturbing details came to light. It turned out that MI5 had actually come across Mohammed Sadiq Khan and Shahzad Tanweer in 2004 during a different terror investigation. But they weren't seen as high-priority threats, and their case was closed. That oversight sparked outrage. Could the bombings have been stopped? Should more have been done? Public demand for answers grew louder, and internal reports admitted to missed opportunities, but said that there wasn't enough actionable intelligence at the time to prevent the attacks. Still, the criticism did lead to changes. Counterterrorism funding was increased, and surveillance powers were expanded. And new strategies, like the PREVENT program, aimed to intervene earlier, particularly in schools and communities where young people might be vulnerable to radicalization. But the reforms were not without controversy. Many in the UK's Muslim community felt unfairly targeted. Some argued that the government's response risked sowing further division and fear. It had to be a delicate balance. You had to keep the country safe without compromising its values. In the years since 7/7, one thing has remained clear. The victims must never be reduced to numbers. They were teachers, nurses, students, parents, and commuters just trying to get to work or school on a Thursday morning. Among them were David Folks, who was just 20 years old. He was on his way to his first full-time job. Gladys Windoa, 60, was a cleaner and charity worker who had just finished her night shift. And Marie Hartley was a cancer survivor who was taken in an instant by someone she had never met. Their lives were stolen, but their stories live on. In Hyde Park, a permanent memorial stands. 52 stainless steel columns, one for each victim. Each year on July 7th, people gather, survivors, families, and first responders. They stand in silence at 8:50 a.m., the moment the first bomb exploded. It was a moment that changed everything. And yet, through all the grief and fear, London did not break. The next day, people got back on the tube. They boarded buses, and they went back to work, determined to carry on. The attackers had hoped to spread fear, but instead, they showed the world what resilience looks like. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!